I wasn't looking for trouble that morning. My task was simple: install a diagnostic update in the executive wing, verify the servers, and leave quietly before anyone noticed I was there. That section of the building was usually reserved for board members, vice presidents, and people whose signatures moved millions, not technicians like me. I walked in with my toolkit, focused on the job, when his voice broke the silence like a blade dragged across glass. He entered with the confidence of someone who had never earned a single accomplishment but collected titles like family souvenirs, designer shoes, a tailored suit, and the unmistakable aura of inherited entitlement. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask what I was doing. He simply stopped, stared at my badge, and smirked as if he discovered a stain on his carpet. "Just a technician? Why are you even on this floor?" he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A couple of executives glanced over, then quickly looked away, offering forced laughs, unwilling to challenge him. Status blinds people faster than arrogance does. What he didn't know was far more valuable than what he assumed. He didn't know I spoke 5 languages fluently. He didn't know I had been part of the silent pilot team testing secure communication protocols for our international investors. He didn't know I had spent 4 years building systems the company couldn't operate without. And above all, he didn't know that the foreign delegation waiting in the adjacent conference room understood every word he said. Insults sting only when they touch insecurity. Mine became a quiet asset. His became a timestamp. He thought he had humiliated a technician. He had actually activated a trap he didn't even know existed. Because sometimes, disrespect doesn't end a story. It begins one. The boardroom had been meticulously prepared for weeks. Contracts were printed on embossed paper, translators were booked on standby, and every executive rehearsed their lines as if they were auditioning for a performance that could redefine the company's future. The partnership with the overseas conglomerate wasn't just a deal. It was a bridge to a market worth hundreds of millions. Only those directly involved were authorized to attend. Yet, when the meeting was about to begin, he walked in, the VP's son, swinging entitlement like a sword made of his father's reputation. He announced confidently that he was there to observe, claiming it was time he got familiar with the business he would one day lead. No one dared challenge him. Authority has a strange way of paralyzing common sense. He sat at the table like a monarch awaiting tribute, rehearsing buzzwords he didn't understand. To him, sounding intelligent was the same as being intelligent. I kept my distance, positioned near the server cabinet, monitoring system access, pretending to blend into the wallpaper. The executives barely acknowledged me, but my silent presence was more valuable than they knew. When the foreign delegation entered, they spoke rapidly in their native language, polite, formal, and precise. Without hesitation, he jumped up, eager to prove his imagined mastery. What followed was a disaster disguised as confidence. He greeted them using phrases he must have copied from an online dictionary, except he butchered the pronunciation and unintentionally used slang typically reserved for street vendors. Faces stiffened. Confusion turned into discomfort. The lead delegate whispered to his colleague, eyebrows raised. He smiled proudly, oblivious to the cultural offense he had just delivered. The room remained unaware of the implications. But I wasn't. I understood every word, and I knew the damage had just begun. What began as arrogance quickly turned into a slow-motion catastrophe. With the confidence of someone who believed effort and expertise were the same thing, he leaned forward and launched into what he imagined was a persuasive pitch. Except his pitch was stitched together from mistranslated buzzwords he had clearly memorized without context. He spoke with grand gestures, smiling proudly, convinced he was impressing the delegation with his international acumen. Then it happened, the sentence that cracked the entire room open. In an attempt to compliment their chief operating officer, he used a term that, in their culture, meant something close to junior clerk or unskilled assistant. It wasn't merely incorrect, it was insulting. A deliberate demotion wrapped in ignorance. The COO's expression didn't change, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. Executives shifted uneasily in their seats. Someone coughed out of panic, not illness. The delegation stopped taking notes. Pens were placed gently on the table, chairs leaned back, and the energy shifted from negotiation to quiet evaluation. Deals don't break with screams, they disintegrate with pauses. His father, the vice president, paled as he sensed something had gone terribly wrong. He opened his mouth to intervene, but it was too late. The damage was now recorded in the memory of everyone present and, worse, in the cultural pride of the visitors. Then they looked at me, the technician, the man they assumed was there only to fix cables and disappear. Their stare wasn't hostile, it was desperate. They needed someone who understood what had just transpired, someone who could interpret the cultural earthquake the VP's son had triggered. In that instant, fluency became power, silence became leverage, and knowledge, the kind no title can buy, became the only currency that mattered in that room. I finally realized I was no longer invisible. The vice president had always spoken to me with the distant politeness reserved for someone whose name he never bothered to learn. But in that moment, panic carved desperation into his voice. He leaned toward me, his hand trembling slightly, and whispered a request he never imagined he would utter to a technician. "Can you translate just a few sentences?" But negotiations don't collapse in fragments, and they cannot be salvaged with fragments either. A few sentences wouldn't repair the cultural insult, nor would they dissolve the tension thickening the air. I didn't translate a few sentences. I took control of the entire dialogue. I stepped forward, introduced myself properly, and addressed the delegation in their language. Not the broken caricature the VP's son had attempted, but the fluent, respectful version that acknowledged their hierarchy, honor, and traditions. Eyebrows lifted. Shoulders eased. The icy atmosphere began to thaw. I restructured clauses they had misunderstood, clarified contractual nuances that had been mangled, and reframed proposals in a way that allowed everyone to save face. Where he had blundered with arrogance, I navigated with precision. Their lead negotiator leaned forward, intrigued, then smiled. A genuine smile, the kind that only appears when someone feels understood rather than persuaded. Before long, the meeting shifted from rescue mission to opportunity. They asked questions directly to me. They laughed at cultural references I made. They requested that certain aspects of the contract be handled by me personally moving forward. The executives remained silent, witnessing competence rewrite the room's hierarchy without raising its voice. Across the table, the VP's son watched me with a complexion that drained by the minute. For the first time in his life, he saw a truth that titles cannot hide. Hierarchy collapses the moment competence walks in. In most companies, disasters fade into gossip, twisted, diluted, eventually forgotten. But this time, the humiliation wasn't a hallway whisper. It was recorded, archived, and legally required to be reviewed. The moment negotiations ended, compliance initiated a standard post-meeting audit, unaware they were about to uncover an unfolding inheritance tragedy disguised as corporate entitlement. The auditors replayed every second, the VP's son interrupting senior executives, misusing technical terms he didn't understand, and casually insulting the foreign delegation, each error time-stamped, each remark preserved like evidence in a trial. There was no room for interpretation. The screen didn't exaggerate. It didn't embellish. It simply reflected truth, mercilessly. Minutes turned into hours as compliance drafted their report. According to internal policy, any behavior threatening contractual relations, brand value, or cultural diplomacy required escalation to the Investment Oversight Committee. Investors who had never heard of him suddenly knew him as the reckless heir jeopardizing global partnerships. Their emails carried a single question: who is this young man endangering million-dollar deals? It wasn't curiosity. It was alarm. Reputation in business isn't emotional, it's transactional. Numbers don't care about lineage, and shareholders don't tolerate liabilities disguised as future leaders. The VP tried to contain the fallout, insisting his son had been eager to learn and merely enthusiastic. But compliance had evidence, not adjectives. Policies are not written for interpretation, they're written for accountability. And accountability doesn't care who your father is. Titles can create illusions of competence. Family names can open doors. But facts? Facts kick them shut. The report concluded with a chilling line, the kind created only when corporate patience runs out. Presence unauthorized. Risk level unacceptable. Suddenly, the VP's son wasn't the future of the company. He was a documented threat to it. In the days that followed, the executive wing moved like a wounded machine. Silent corridors, nervous glances, secret meetings behind half-closed doors. The vice president, normally composed and authoritative, was now a man cornered by consequences. He attempted damage control with the desperation of someone who finally understood that mistakes at his level don't fade, they echo. He blamed everything but responsibility. Stress, cultural misunderstanding, tight deadlines, even my presence. It was almost comical how quickly accountability mutated into excuses. But excuses have short legs. They don't travel far. The board cared about one thing only: exposure. They weren't debating intentions or emotions. They were reviewing financial projections and investor feedback. And investors don't invest in chaos. Clients who once saw the company as a stable gateway into international markets now included one surprising condition in every communication: we request the presence of your multilingual technician during all future negotiations. They didn't ask for him, the heir with an inherited name. They asked for me, the technician whose competence had saved them from embarrassment. That single request reframed the entire narrative. Influence had shifted. The corporate ladder had quietly reassembled itself, and the rungs no longer supported the weight of entitlement. The VP's son quickly learned the brutal truth of corporate adulthood. Status borrowed from a parent is not status, it's credit, and credit always demands repayment. Suddenly, no one wanted him in meetings. Departments avoided his emails. Junior employees no longer pretended to admire him. Reputation, once assumed permanent, evaporated. He wasn't a future leader anymore. He was a risk, a liability with a last name that no longer guaranteed protection. Where his father once saw a successor, the board now saw a red flag. And in business, red flags don't get coached. They get removed. Terminations in corporate environments are usually padded with euphemisms: restructuring, realignment, new leadership priorities. Not this time. The decision unfolded with the sterile precision of a medical procedure. No emotion, no ceremony, just facts and signatures. Contrary to the stories he later told himself, his dismissal had nothing to do with me speaking multiple languages or stepping out of my role. It was far simpler than that. Competence had witnesses. The board watched a recording that required no commentary. They saw a young man wielding entitlement like a shield, confusing access with value, assuming proximity to power made him powerful. They saw him disrespect foreign partners whose contracts represented the company's international future. They saw him destabilize a negotiation through ignorance, not malice. And most importantly, they saw someone who believed the world owed him success simply because of his last name. Adults don't respect entitlement. They tolerate it until it costs money. The morning of his termination, he entered the building believing rumors were temporary and influence was permanent. But silence met him at every hallway. His keycard access failed at the executive elevator. His father's assistant avoided eye contact. HR waited with documents already printed. His name, once spoken with expectation, now floated like a cautionary tale, a reminder that respect cannot be inherited, only earned. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He simply stared at the cardboard box handed to him, then at the office he once assumed would be his. He packed in silence, removing diplomas he didn't use and motivational quotes he didn't understand. As he walked out, he passed the company logo he had never learned to pronounce correctly. It wasn't personal. It was accountability dressed in consequence. And accountability doesn't negotiate. Titles were once something I watched other people collect: gold plates on polished doors, names embossed in email signatures, job descriptions drenched in authority. I never imagined one would be created because of me, let alone for me. Yet that is exactly what happened. In the aftermath of the incident, the board convened, not to debate my worth, but to acknowledge a reality they could no longer ignore. The company had outgrown its confidence, and it needed competence. Permanent competence. They drafted a new department, one designed to protect the company from the cultural, linguistic, and diplomatic disasters that arrogance so easily provokes. The title they handed me was long, deliberate, and undeniable: Head of International Systems and Cultural Compliance. A role that didn't exist before I entered that boardroom. A role that carries veto authority over every foreign negotiation. A role tied not to hierarchy, but to proven value. Today, executives who once passed me in hallways without notice now wait for my recommendations. My words redirect contracts. My signatures finalize expansions. My presence, once dismissed as background noise, has become a structural requirement. He mocked my badge, as if identity rested on plastic and ink. He misread my silence, assuming quiet meant inferior. He confused titles with value, forgetting that titles crumble when competence enters the room. He lost his job because he never understood the basics of professional survival. Respect is currency. Ignorance is debt. Entitlement collects interest. I gained something far greater than revenge. I gained a future no one can fire me from. A future built not on a last name, but on skill, fluency, and decisions that move markets. In the end, he inherited expectations. I inherited reality. And reality always wins.